Good evening and welcome to the Bat of Minerva. This is Peter Shea, host for the show Mercifully Behind the Camera. Tonight visiting with an old friend of my son's, Patrick Rains, who went to Friends School back in the days when my son was there. Patrick I've known for many years as somebody with a strong interest in animals, which has never wavered. And now, as he finishes high school, he's going off to college to study animal behavior at Earlham. And I thought, well, it'd be fun to catch somebody. I may be talking to the next Gerald Durrell, the next great animal person. It'd be fun to do the first interview. Besides, I've been fascinated by Patrick's work with bears, especially for the last few years. Patrick, can you tell us a little bit about your interest in animals and how it has evolved over your life?
Well, my interest in bears probably started with a favorite teddy bear, and always carrying that around with me. And it grew into as I grew up, I always particularly liked bears. They're very large, strong animals, but they oftentimes aren't as bullying as some of the other smaller animals. Obviously that varies with different species, but I liked just their general demeanor. And now I have been volunteering at Como Zoo for 4 years. Got to work with a Kodiak bear there for the last year of its life, and with 2 polar bears. And that's been a lot of fun to get to learn about the bears and their personalities, stuff like that.
Well, I suppose every kid has a teddy bear at some point. It's just part of the technology of childhood.
Yeah.
And a lot of kids at a certain age, pretty early on, leave that behind for G.I. Joe or something. I think your interest in stuffed bears evolved in a pretty interesting way before you made the jump to live ones.
Yeah.
Can you tell about that a little bit?
Well, you talk about how most kids switch over to G.I. Joes, and I think in a large way my bear sort of became my G.I. Joe. I'd have little, adventures with it, and would use my other, action figures as, bad guys. Have the teddy bear fight them.
Mm-hmm. You went through a bear making period too.
Yep.
How did that go?
None of the teddy bears came out very, very pretty, but I made a lot of teddy bears. My dad got me a kit with cutouts of how you sew all the bears together, and then putting in the eyes and the nose was always tough, but there are a lot of ugly bears.
Your largest one was how big?
3 feet tall. Which at the time I was like 4 feet tall, so that was pretty big for me.
And how long did it take you to make this thing?
Oh, I don't know. It was definitely around 2 months, maybe 3 months.
And how old were you when you made this 3-foot bear?
I don't know, maybe 11.
Uh-huh.
Yeah.
Great. Now, did you have the same, I mean, did you play with the bears you made, or did you pretty much put them on a shelf and play with the ones that looked a little bit more finished?
I played with some of the bears I made, particularly the 3-foot tall one, because it's the biggest teddy bear I own. I would bring it out for jokes every once in a while. I brought it to school one day. I actually got in trouble because it was 3 feet tall and I was holding it on top of my head. Teacher thought I was being a distraction to the other students.
Why would a teacher think that?
I don't know.
So how did the other students handle this kid that kept bringing big bears to school?
I think it's probably a good thing that I was always a fairly large child. But most of the people were pretty fine with it. The kids in the grades above me definitely thought I was pretty weird, but the kids who knew me seemed pretty, they just knew that's Patrick. That's what he does.
So when did you meet your first real bear?
That's probably when I was really young, because my family would take me to the Como Zoo a lot, and Herman, who's the polar bear that was there before the current set, had been there, since I was born. So that was probably the first real bear I ever met.
So you kind of grew up in the Como Zoo.
Yep.
Huh. What do you think of that zoo?
I think it's a good zoo. They start out with a lot less funding than most zoos do, and they started out as just one building with a few animals as part of a city park, and have grown into, they're increasingly getting closer to being of the same quality as other zoos. Obviously, they're pretty limited with their location and how big the enclosures can be. And that's probably the worst limit that zoo has. For a lot of the animals, like the polar bears or the gorillas, they're used to roaming large areas, and Como Zoo just doesn't really have a lot of space to give them that sort of area to roam. But other than that, just about everybody that works there is, trying to help the animals, and it's a great place for people to, take their family on a, free day when they're all just going to be hanging out.
I used to work at the nursing home down the street, and sometimes arrived early there and stopped at the zoo for a little bit. It was just open.
Yeah.
There weren't many animals around early in the morning, but you could kind of poke around. I always liked that. Is it still free?
Yep. They are still a city park, free admission to anyone. That's why they don't have as good funding as the other zoos, because of some budget cuts that Governor Pawlenty did. They've put up a sign asking each adult to give $1 and 50 cents for each child, but that's just asked. It's still free admission.
So how did you visited Como Zoo for a lot of years just as a kid and got to know the bears there and other animals. When did you start? How was it to start volunteering there, and how did you get into that?
Well, at the end of middle school, I was looking for something to do over my summers because that's about the age where summer camps stop taking you. And so I looked around and had always sort of thought that it would be pretty fun to be a zookeeper. And so I looked at Minnesota Zoo, and they don't really have any programs for kids outside of leading a daycare camp. But Como Zoo had a program. It's a junior docent program where I got trained in on interesting facts on just about all the animals, and how to talk about the animals. There's several pets. The species that they are commonly pets, but at the zoo they're treated as wild animals. But those species, we could take out and show the public, and learn how to handle those animals.
I see. So like, were you the guy with the snake wrapped around him?
Yep.
And such like?
Yep.
I've seen those guys when I've been at the zoo sometimes. You're working just at the zoo. You weren't going out to the schools kind of thing. Or?
Yeah, just at the zoo.
I see. So you gave like hour talks to folks?
Well, what would happen is you get put at, a part of the zoo. And if you go to the zoo Mondays, Tuesdays, or Fridays, you'll see these, kids out there doing this. You get set at a part of the zoo, and you have an animal, or sometimes it's a cart with a lot of props so you can talk about the gorilla or something. And people walk by and get interested because you've got something like a snake or a fake gorilla skull or something, and then you talk to them about gorillas and their sagittal crests. Let's say gorillas, if you ever look at them, they have this huge mound on top of their head, and that's because there's a bone that most animals have that runs like this, and it helps their jaw muscles be better. And gorillas have, one of the largest of those bones. And our jaw muscles just go up to here, but most jaw muscles of most animals run all the way up to here so they can have a really strong bite. And gorillas actually, their teeth break when they do it, but they've been known to dent metal bars and such. So their jaw muscle is really strong, and that helps them eat bamboo and unripe fruit and stuff like that.
Mm. And the crest is somehow connected to that muscle? Or?
Yep. Maybe you know about trochanters in the thighs. This little on your femur, there are little protrusions, and all of the muscles just attach to that, so that they've got something to move on to. The sagittal crest is like that. It's just all the muscles attach up here and then run down under the, I forget what it's called, but if you ever look at a skull, there's this little hole right here, two little loops, and they run through that up to the sagittal crest, and when it contracts, it just pulls this whole area tight and gives them a really powerful bite. Mm-hmm. And humans, their jaw muscles just go up to here. They don't really.
So how long was your training before you were able to to do these talks?
We train for about 8 hours a day, one day a week, and like 2 weeks a month. Over the winter before school let out, and then you knew all the facts and were ready to go out and talk to the public.
Were you trained for all the different stations,
Yes.
so you could really fill in, with the snake or with the gorilla or whatever?
Yep.
I see. Was there a lot of a waiting list? I mean, somebody who's watching here might be interested in doing this. Was it a fairly easy thing to get into, or did you have to be on a waiting list? Was there a lot of application involved?
Well, what happens is you can call up the Como Zoo education department, and in the fall, people come in and try out for this job. Everyone that tries to sign up will get we'll get to go to a session where they talk about what the job fully entails, and how many hours a year you're supposed to log and stuff like that. And then they set a schedule for a month later. You're supposed to come back and give them a presentation. At least when I did it, they wanted us to research an animal on our own and talk about that animal. And so then they judged who got in based on how good they were with talking about the animals that they'd researched. And the year that I signed up, they had about twice as many people as they had open positions, but that varies from year to year. So yeah, if anybody's interested, that's how you get involved in that job.
And the sign-up would be in the summer? The initial sign-up would be in the summer? Or early fall? Early fall,
Yeah.
Okay. So you start out, you're doing the various stations, talking about the animal there to whoever's interested and comes by. What kind of hourly commitment is that?
That was 14 hours a week.
14 hours a week. Wow. So all through the summer you were 14 hours a week talking about animals. Is there growth? You've been doing this for a while. Is there growth potential as you've been there a while? Do you get promoted to anything?
Yeah.
How does that go?
They've got at the end of my first year there, I found out about this program called the Enrichment program, which mostly consists of building and designing toys for the cats and the bears. And they also have a separate enrichment program for the primates. And primates actually get to do a lot of really cool stuff for their enrichment. But cats and polar bears, I personally think that's one of the best jobs that you can get at the zoo. And they do require that to be part of that job, you have to have worked 15 hours at the zoo someplace else. So, most people who are volunteering easily meet that requirement of 15 hours. And so you show up on a weekend, and you'll have an animal that you're working on, and try and come up with something that's safe for the animal, but still interesting and can engage them and keep them mentally healthy for a while. And there's plenty of other jobs that you can move into as well as time goes on.
Well, let's talk for a minute about this enrichment. So I'll bet you immediately wanted to enrich the life of the polar bears,
Yep.
right?
Yeah.
And what kind of stuff did you come up with?
Well, you go into that job thinking of a lot of really cool things, and then you find out stuff like anything with metal in it isn't approved because they could, somehow cut themselves. If you say you use wood and that's got nails in it, and they pry it apart, they could step on that. And so, in an effort to stay safe, just about everything that you can think of gets ruled out for the polar bears, mostly because they are in the habit of eating anything. Cloth, cardboard, foam, but they can have plastic. So we get really inventive with PVC pipe and soft plastics that when they break don't shatter and leave sharp pieces, break and leave pieces that won't really cut the polar bears at all. And that's been really cool. I think it sort of adds to the job to have the extra challenge to think around these restrictions. So yeah, and you get to know the polar bears pretty well. Part of the best enrichment that I ever came up with on my own is polar bears in the wild naturally pound on ice. They wait at a seal breathing hole, and then will stand up and just come down and crush through the ice to break it open when the seal comes up to breathe, and then try and reach down and grab the seal up out of the water. So I took some pumpkins and froze Jello in them, because polar bears in the wild only eat the blubber off of seals, assuming they aren't starving. They'll only eat the blubber and leave the rest of it for scavengers. And blubber is actually really similar in consistency to Jello, and the polar bears we have at the zoo have a bit of a sweet tooth. So they really, like Jello basically, and so I put it in a pumpkin to try and simulate the skin or container, and then froze that in a big Rubbermaid Tupperware container of ice and put that in their exhibit. So they had to work at pounding through it. I got them doing their natural activities, and when they're all done with it, the ice melts and it doesn't leave much of a mess for the zookeepers to clean up.
Huh. So building toys for polar bears requires knowing what polar bears would do in their natural habitat.
Well, that's one of the main goals of enrichment, is to try and promote their natural activities. Because we give them PVC pipe feeders and stuff where they have to figure out how to roll the PVC pipe just right so that the hole that the holes line up and the food falls out and stuff like that. But that's not really something that polar bears come across in the wild. But it does keep them mentally involved. And it's really good when you can think of something that will be more natural sorts of activities. Because I do think that there's something important about keeping animals in as natural an environment as you can manage.
Well, is there some big literature out there, I mean, on the internet, toys for wild animals or enrichment for wild animals with, 100 tips for keeping your polar bear safe, that kind of thing?
There actually is a magazine put out. It's called The Shape of Enrichment. And we've taken a few ideas from their book and other zoos, but Como Zoo's restrictions are a little bit different from other zoos. We get an unbelievably high traffic zoo. There's we get probably more people in and out, during a day than any other zoo, and so public opinion is a big concern of the managers of the zoo. And so they used to do these things where, like, you would give the tigers a live chicken, right? It was great because it was simple to do. Well, it wasn't great for the chicken, but the tigers got natural hunting techniques, stuff like that. But if you've ever had a cat, they don't always kill the bird. Sometimes they just torture it for a long period of time. And so one of the times the tigers did that. They didn't kill the chicken, they just left it. And so that was a really bad experience because it, didn't leave a very good impression on a lot of people who visited the zoo. So there's restrictions like that happen where something may be very, pleasurable for the animals, but it's not something that people want to see, and it's a very public zoo, so it's a large concern.
So whatever toy you make for the polar bears gets played with out in public?
Mm-hmm.
I see. So partly you're making things that give the people a good show.
Yes.
So the polar bear isn't just sitting there being a polar bear. And partly it's something that makes the polar bear not go crazy.
Yep. And if you ever go to the zoo and watch the polar bears, what they'll be doing about 90% of the time that you're there is they will be pacing back and forth or swimming in a pattern, repeating, touching the same spot. It's actually sort of a problem because they'll, rub their shoulder on the one spot and just that one part of their shoulder on just that one spot, and they'll repeat it each time. And they'll slowly wear off all the hair just right there. And so basically, this is a result of their, not being able to roam. Polar bears in the wild walk, huge distances, and they just, roam looking for, something, food, seal breathing holes, beached whales, anything that they can find. And in the wild, you can't give them a 100-mile, and in a zoo you can't give them a 100-mile enclosure. So they get that exercise that they're missing by repetitive movement. And so yeah, that's pretty boring for the public, and if we can keep them from doing that, it also helps out with their sanity quite a bit to give them a, one of those little plastic pools that you sometimes give kids to play in your backyard. Instead, they just pick it up and toss it and stuff. Have a pretty fun time with that.
Well, do you feel like you've gotten inside the psychology, the mind of the bears?
You know, I really know about that much of the bears' psychology, because I see them, you know, once a week at most for a few hours. Sometimes the enrichment sessions are more spaced out, and so the zookeepers really know them much better than I do. And even then, you know, our perceptions of animals can be very different from the actual actions of animals. So I mean, you know, I think that I know a little bit about them, but I don't know them very well.
Do you think they are anywhere near happy or anywhere near sane?
Yeah, I think that they're actually pretty close to sane. You know, the fact that they, you know, roam and do that pattern a lot makes people think that they're insane, but I see them socially interact with each other and the zookeepers in a way that shows that they are staying stimulated mentally and still capable of, you know, essentially rational thoughts and actions. And I also think that they are pretty happy. You know, they're in a difficult situation, but they do seem to enjoy themselves quite a bit. So.
I wonder whether some of the tricks of sort of minimal virtual reality are ever going to work for bears. I mean, if you could get a bear to roam 500 miles in a space the size of this room. You could get the floor to move.
Yeah, okay. You know? I was going to say, I don't know that the bear could take more than a step or two. So it would be sort of...
It's just if the floor but if the floor moves, you can get the bear to go as many 100 miles as you have a motor to move the floor. Problem is, the bear knows he's in a room unless what he sees is Arctic wilderness.
Yeah.
I don't know whether that's possible, but I wonder if it would be possible to simulate realistically enough. Probably have to do smells. So.
Yep. That's actually probably the biggest thing, is that the people who pioneer the technology will make it for visual effects, because that is our species' main responder. But with polar bears, a huge part of how they pick what direction they're going to walk in and stuff like that is going to be based on how it smells. And things like wind and stuff like that will just be crucial, and it might not ever be perfected to the point. And I think that by the time that you get visual effects to that order, there's going to be a big threat to zoos, because people, there will probably be a large enough portion of people who don't care whether the animal is real, that, you know, just seeing the animal like it was real is good enough for them. And so that could be a very large threat to zoos in general. And yeah, with the whole thing of very different forms of perception between humans and most of the animals, like, all of the hoof stock, zebras and giraffes and lions and tigers, their visual cues are very different from our visual cues, and they focus more on, olfactory things, smells and stuff. Yeah.
Hmm. Well, you raise an interesting question. What is the importance of zoos? I mean, parents can get their kids any number of books, animals of the world, good big pictures of them in their natural habitat, doing their natural thing. And is there something that's gained by going to a zoo and actually seeing the animal?
Yeah, I think there is, especially when enrichment is involved, because for my job at the zoo, the people who come and visit, when they've been given a new item, oftentimes see behavior that they have never seen before, and they see motion, and you get to, I think, sort of understand a little bit of their character just by that, few minute long interaction with them. But that, as far as pictures go, people really like to see the real thing, but I'd worry about virtual reality if it ever gets perfected to that sort of point, that there will be a good number of people who still want to see the animals in their natural in as close to their natural environments as can be given, but that there will be also a majority of people who probably would be fine to go someplace else. So.
Has anything surprised you during all the time you've been, working at the zoo, about bears or about any other animal or about people, or what kinds of things have come up that you didn't expect?
Well, Como Zoo gets a lot of problems from its being as open to the public as it is, and that sort of surprised me. That 99% of the people come and go through the zoo without ever disturbing anything. That there were two guys who tried to donate a gigantic snapping turtle. They just carried a box into the zoo and were going to dump it in the waterfowl enclosure. There was another guy walking around trying to break into people's cars, and actually attacked one of the zookeepers when they confronted him about it. So I don't know. I was just sort of surprised at how that sort of stuff gets brought to a place that's when it is more public, like the Como Zoo is, and the security people always have to be careful of pedophiles, because it's it's free. You can go in there whenever you want, and there's lots of kids running around, lots of kids getting out of sight of their parents, and so that sort of things. I was really sort of surprised to find out about how prominent that darker aspect of humanity is, although it also, is a very small percentage of the people. But just when it happens, it's pretty striking.
So the big surprises have been about people.
Yeah, that people do what they do. I suppose the surprise about animals is back before I started working there, one of the gorillas escaped, and they have a drill for this. They call every single person into a building and then lock the doors. They get everybody out of the streets, and then zookeepers get dart guns and go out and try and find the animal. Well, the gorilla that escaped, was sort of having fun, with people being on the caged up side of the glass and him being on the not caged up side of the glass, because they were inside of the building and he was free outside. And then so he was wandering around the zoo, and one of the zookeepers came across him but didn't have his gun, and so he went and ran to the truck to get his dart gun, and then the gorilla turned and ran and jumped back into the exhibit without needing to be shot or anything. So that was sort of surprising, just that the animal would willingly go back in. Sort of shows that they want to get out because it's something new and curiosity, but they really don't know much of what to do once they're out. So there's a threat, they'll run back in for the safety of comfort and familiarity, I guess. At least for that gorilla. Maybe it doesn't. It won't happen very often for other escapes.
So what are the zookeepers like? What are the people who are there every day? What keeps them coming to work?
Basically they really enjoy working with and getting to know the animals as closely as they get to. But you get all sorts of people working around there. I think that the one thing that's in common for all of them is their desire to stay in touch with the animals. They develop a pretty close bond. You get to know them all. I think it's sort of like, it's a lot like any sort of interaction you do with, say, children at a daycare or something like that. You come to love all of them and understand them all, stuff like that.
So do the zookeepers have names for all these beasts?
Yep.
Individual names?
Actually, most of the names are, common, and just about everybody who works there knows them. Like the two polar bears are named Neil and Buzz after the astronauts, and the two parent lions, the older pair, are named Garth and Winona, both country singers, and the younger pair of lions are Mufasa and Savannah. The tiger female is Pastriel, and the tiger male is Chew. I think that might be after Chewbacca, but I don't actually know. I suppose the snow leopards and the cougars I actually don't know well enough. I might get them wrong, but those are a few of the animal names.
Well, and do like the snakes all have names too?
They do, but I don't know them.
I see. So
there was one snake that I knew. It was an albino, and its name was Phoebe. But So I know that all of the other animals have them, but they have like 5 corn snakes, and I know the one that's albino, so that I can tell from the others, but it's pretty tough to keep the other ones straight, because you don't get a lot of exposure to them over a long period of time to learn to recognize the small differences in them and identify them.
But the keeper would know.
Yeah.
Huh. So it's sort of a family.
Yep.
Is turnover reasonably low, or did you get much of keepers?
Oh, of keepers. Most keepers get a job and keep it for as long as they can.
Uh-huh.
It's a pretty tough job market to get into. Normally you have to set yourself up with an internship for a few years until a position opens up, and then you're in a good place to get a job. But it's pretty much just you get the job and you stay there, because it is like a family. All the animals that you work with, and you don't really want to leave them.
Hmm. So, do funny things happen at the zoo? Course of your time there?
Probably one of the funnier things for other people to see was one time I got sprayed by a snake. The person next to me was holding a snake, talking about the snake, and then the snake just went to the bathroom and sprayed me. And yeah, I stunk the rest of the day.
Mm-hmm.
In enrichment, there's a lot of things that are really interesting to see. Just one of the times Winona just laid on her back and batted at this hanging object that we had, just like a house cat would, just sitting there like, and that was pretty funny, because she's like 800 pounds and could crush me, but she's acting like a kid.
Gee. Now you've done some dressing up as animals as part of your time at the zoo too, haven't you?
Yeah.
I saw some pictures of your costumes.
Yep. The Como Zoo has a thing called Zubu every Halloween, where little kids come and walk around. And for the past 3 years, I've been involved in that. Wore one of Como Zoo's gorilla costumes, and then one of my lion costumes, and then now I own my own gorilla costume. And so I went again in that costume. And it's a lot of fun. I think I freak out a little bit. I think I freak out some of the kids sometimes. Because definitely, there was one of them who came up to me and very earnestly told me that I wasn't real, that I was wearing a costume. Just the whole fact of like a 2-year-old being like, "You're not real." But yeah, I don't know. I get pretty into wearing an animal costume. I try and mimic behaviors as much as I can and stuff. It's been pretty fun.
Now, you don't have a bear costume yet?
No, I do not. I can sort of adapt some of my other costumes to make pretty decent bear costumes, but I have a gorilla costume, and that's been a lot of fun to own, because there's so many instances where having a gorilla costume just adds to the effect of something.
It's the necessary fashion accessory for the well-dressed St. Paul person, yes.
Exactly.
Yes. You don't leave home without it.
I actually had it in my car for a long time.
Just in case one of those occasions came up.
It came up surprisingly often.
Well, what sorts of occasions come up where it becomes necessary to leap Superman-like into the gorilla costume, or Clark Kent-like?
Yeah, you're just, like, one time our science club was going to go make an announcement about a fundraiser we were having. And we were thinking, we could go up there and be just boring and talk about it. Or, I could go put on the gorilla suit and, be sitting there dancing in the background while someone gave the announcement. And then, there were countless times where me and my friends were just sitting around bored and were talking about maybe pulling a prank on Walmart or something like that. And, when you go out to do something like that, a gorilla suit is really priceless. The one that I think is really classic is to put on the gorilla suit and to go and try and buy some Gorilla Glue from a hardware store and try and pay for it with bananas and barter with the guy, 1 banana, 2 banana, 3 banana, and then maybe throw in an orange or something. And then you get pissed when the guy isn't, letting you pay with fruit and just steal the glue and run out. And then you need a friend to come by and apologize for letting their pet gorilla off the leash and, pay for the stuff. Clean up the fruit and such. But yeah, there's plenty of instances where a gorilla suit comes in handy.
Yes, I can see the ad campaign. Things go better with a gorilla suit. Don't leave home without it. You only live once. Live in a gorilla suit. I mean, Madison Avenue could have a field day with this song. Or, I suppose, all sorts of other animals. But gorillas are good because you can actually stand upright. I mean, a bear would be hard because you'd have to be on all fours to be right. Most of the time. Well, you're going off to Earlham to do animal behavior studies. Have you thought about where you want to take your interest in bears and animals and zoos?
I'd really like to be a zookeeper myself. At the end of 4 years, but college has changed things for a lot of people, so I'm also keeping my mind pretty open.
So that would be a matter of coming back to, say, the Como Zoo and going through the internship?
Yep, and I think Como Zoo is actually a pretty good place to try and get in because I've got such good relationships with a lot of the people there. It looks good on the resume that I worked at a zoo for 4 years, but it's better when I know and have interacted with the people who are hiring me.
Yeah. Now, do you have any urge to go and spend time with bears in the wild? Go up and stay up, visit the Kodiak, the polar bears that come through that town where everybody hides, and the polar bears come through.
I think that going off and spending some time with watching polar bears and grizzly bears and whatever in the wild could be really important for just getting knowledge of what their actual natural habitats are and their natural behaviors are, because I read a lot of books about that sort of stuff and try and learn as much as I can about natural behaviors, but really the best way to learn what's natural is to see it. and to have personal experience with it. And so, yeah, I would like to go off and spend some time with wild bears sometime.
Now, I suppose a natural place for somebody with your interest to land would be in, a national park maybe, or working on research with animals, or working, say, for an organization that's preserving habitat.
Yeah.
But you have a special fondness for zoos, and this idea of coming back and being a zookeeper attracts you. You say a little bit about, of all of the options, the animal options for careers, realizing, of course, that things might change when you see what else out there, but what is it that draws you back to a zoo?
Well, I just really like zoos. They're a place where the animals are, and people get to understand the animals better. The zoo isn't a great environment for animals because, people just, continually, watching and sometimes yelling at the animals takes a very big toll on, how stressed they are and stuff like that. But people are always going to want to be able to see the animals, and the people who work at the zoo are really only working to counter that and make life as good as possible for the animals. So I think that a zoo is definitely a good place to work, even though it's not natural, because it's always going to exist.
So somebody has to protect the animals from the people.
Sort of, yeah.
And that's something that you'd like to do.
Yeah.
Huh. Now, do you have a preference? I mean, there are zoos like Como that don't have a lot of money and can't do this big habitat thing. And then you have zoos, various other zoos that have pretenses of providing, Minnesota Zoo actually is donating, is putting so much habitat that you often can't see more than a few inches of the animal.
Yeah.
Among those kinds of zoos, do you have a preference as to where you might want to work?
Not really. I like Como Zoo because I've been working there and the people have been very good to me. And one of the things that I have a problem with about the big zoos is that, they have a lot of money and they put a lot of money into their habitat, but about half of the money that they spend on making their habitat better is spent on making the habitat better for people. And then, they spend the other, particularly the Minnesota Zoo, I think spends a lot of their time making, working at better experiences for the people, and investing their money towards that, which is, important. That's why zoos exist, but even though they've got more expensive and fancier looking exhibits, that sometimes those exhibits aren't much better than the, cheaper ones. Like Como Zoo has probably the cheapest exhibit of all time. They have a timber wolf habitat. It is a piece of forest, that was on the edge of the zoo, just fenced off, then with electric fencing in between that so that the wolves can't, bite people's fingers who decide to stick their fingers through the fence. And, it is just a completely natural habitat. And I think it's probably one of the best habitats for anybody, for any animal of any zoo. It's just to give them a plot of their natural habitat, but you can't do that with a lot of animals. Mm-hmm. And that was really cheap to build. But,
mm-hmm. So it may be that what matters to the animal is seriously different than what seems to be important or what would matter to people.
Yep.
And
like lions, the people complain about how when they go to the zoo, the lions are just sitting around all day. That's what they do in the middle of the day. They sit and sleep, and they hunt at night. So it looks like they aren't active to the people, but really that's their natural behavior.
So if they could just send them out to some of the seedier neighborhoods of St. Paul in the evening, they'd have perfectly happy lives.
Yeah.
Send them out to a little hunting.
Yeah.
Take care of crime in the streets. Well, thanks lots, Patrick, and best of luck with your time in Earlham, and I look forward to interviewing you when you start your zookeeper job, wherever you start it.
Thanks.